Hello and welcome back to another episode of Insight by TVC22. I'm your host, Thomas Stockting. Today we're not doing it virtually, we are in person. As you may have noticed over the past couple of days and weeks, the real summer weather has arrived. Ironic considering it is raining a little bit today, but with the summer weather comes a bunch of activities for the local residents that do include obviously watering one's lawn and filling up a swimming pool to make the most of the water and escaping some of the real intense heat we can have in our region over the summer. What you may have noticed as well is during that period of time that the city of Clarence-Rockland started issuing some warnings, as they have done over previous years, stating there's been overuse and overconsumption of water locally. Now, how in 2021, when you've got the Ottawa River in the background and you're next to the Canadian capital, is this still an issue? Or is it something we need to be thinking about more based on our own water consumption and start to think a little bit more environmentally? But to answer some of the questions today about the way in which the water system works here in the city and why these kind of overconsumption charges come into place, I am joined by the Director of Infrastructure for the City of Clarence-Rockland, Mr. Julian Lenhart. How are you doing, Julian?
I'm good, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much for coming down and joining me today. Terribly sorry to drag you out in the rain, which I know it's been so sunny recently.
It has. Yeah.
Julian, I think really the first place to start is we're going to dive through and dissect a little bit what you and I have seen already on the inside of this water treatment plant. But really I'd like to start at the crux of the issue, which is simply we live so close to Ottawa. We've got the Ottawa River just over there, and yet in the summer, the end of spring, summer months, there's a shortage of water. Why is that?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand how water networks are designed and how they're operated. So we have to meet the provincial guidelines, and we have to design and operate our network to meet normal demands, so average demands. And what that means is it represents about 10 months out of the year. Mm-hmm. So we don't design our networks to meet peak demands.
And in terms of, you mentioned peak demand there, which is not what the network's built for, it's built for the rest of the month of the year. What's the kind of, do you have any numbers off the top of your head in terms of how much water is normally used by the residents of the municipality in general versus these peak months that seem to be right now in the middle of June?
Yeah, so on average we produce and consume about 5,500 to 6,000 cubic meters a day. Mm-hmm. And during peak periods, it's closer to about 7,700, almost 8,000 cubic meters a day. So almost double the demand.
And the water that's produced here goes into the water towers as well. How much can be stored in the water towers? Is it simply a case of, hey, let's build a bigger water tower and get more water into it to handle these summer months?
Well, so our water towers are designed to be able to store about 7,700, so which is what the current peak demand is. Mm-hmm. However, our towers serve predominantly three purposes. The first one is to store water and have it available for normal consumption, but it also is to regulate pressure throughout the network, and it's also to there's a fire capacity, so there's about 40% of the tower that is reserved for firefighting and fire capacity. So even though that the reservoirs themselves can contain up to 7,700 cubic meters a day, we can't consume all of that. So we need to keep it for the other purposes.
And I mean, just to sort of bring us back to sort of the way in which it works to begin with, I know you and I have just had a little bit of a look around at the water treatment plant here. What is involved in the purification process of the water, and how long does it take to be dragged from the river behind you over there to ending up essentially coming out of my tap at home?
Yeah, so the treatment process essentially goes through about 8 or 10 steps, or 8 or 9 steps, sorry. So it starts from drawing the water from the river. It goes through a process where sedimentation is dropped to the bottom, and then the water becomes, it's clean and it becomes clear water. Then there's chemicals that are added, chlorine predominantly, to treat the water. And then it is pumped to our reservoirs. That process takes about 1 hour to 2 hours by the time it leaves the treatment plant. And then by the time it reaches the reservoirs, it depends on the consumption, how it's used, the time of the day, because as the water leaves, it's also drawn. So houses are connected onto the infrastructure of the water main, so houses draw some of the water, And then it needs to travel through about 250 kilometers of pipes and fill up 3 reservoirs throughout the network. So it could take up to a few hours, about 5 hours, to make it to the reservoirs.
So based on some of the stuff you're saying as well, it's really about managing the balance between the water that's coming in and the water that's coming out and the demand that's required in the city, especially, as you say, over the course of those 9-10 main months versus the overuse months that we see around the summertime. So how really does the city sort of manage the supply and consumption of water? How do you balance that out?
Yeah, well, that's right. And we manage that through our reservoirs. So it's predominantly through the 3 reservoirs. There's about, like I'd mentioned, 7,700 cubic meters of water that's stored there. So for the 10 months out of the year, that is sufficient amount of water. Normal consumption is about 5,000, like I'd mentioned, 5,500. So there's in excess of water stored in the reservoirs. The challenge or the issue is really for those 2 months out of the year, where the consumption increases to the point where we have a hard time filling up the water towers.
So forgive the ignorance, but the basic question here would be, why not just get a system that can handle those 2 extra months, handle that extra water for people, yet just produce less during the rest of the year? Why is that not possible for the city?
Yeah, well, so theoretically that is an option, but in practice what happens is that the entire network kind of operates as one system, right? So you can't easily isolate out one section. And then there's the cost. It would be very inefficient. There's the cost associated with having infrastructure that would sit there not used for potentially 10 months out of the year. So when you consider all of that, it really doesn't make it feasible to increase the size of the network to deal or to produce more water or store more water for those 2 months.
So again, you couldn't have parts of the network that are cut off at some points of the year and then opened again for these 2 months. That would, as you're stating, incur some extra costs, would it, and maintenance?
Well, there's the cost associated with that. Then there's also the water main or an infrastructure that isn't used would need to be sanitized. We wouldn't be able to not use it for a period of time and then just open it up and have water run through it. It'd be a whole sanitization process that would need to come into place. There's the cost of the infrastructure. So yeah, those are the main reasons why it wouldn't be feasible to.
And talking about some of the infrastructure, you mentioned there's 3 water towers as well. I mean, there's houses connected to the water pipes as well. How much infrastructure does the city currently have in place to get water to all its residents?
So currently we have one treatment plant. We have a pumping station on Caron Street. We have the 3 reservoirs throughout the municipality, and we have about 250 kilometers of water main pipe. So there's fire hydrants and there's valves, but that's the major of the network.
And we know, and we saw on a plaque on the inside sort of talking about the expansion of the water treatment plant that finished in 2009. I think the plaque said, obviously the city of Clarence-Rockland, the municipality, has grown over the past couple of decades, and we know from the 10-year plan and the look at the economic development plan here that there is a very likelihood of a chance of the city expanding once again. So will the network need to be made bigger at that point to accommodate more people? And is it not something we could just do beforehand to be able to help out during these months now?
So yeah, the network is going to be increased to meet demand or to meet the growth. However, that's not something that can be done at this time, or it shouldn't be done at this time, because like I mentioned a bit earlier, it's the balance between producing water, storing water, and making sure that the water is potable. Water has a shelf life or a period of time where it's considered potable, and it's being able to manage all that. So if we produce more water, we store more water, it sits in the reservoirs for longer, at some point the water isn't potable anymore, and we'd have to find a way to either flush it or to recycle the water, or we'd be wasting water, right? When the plant or when the infrastructure is increased to meet the growth, it is going to be increased with the same principles in place. So it will be done so that we meet average or normal demands, which represents about 10 months out of the year. It is not going to be designed to meet the peak demands at that time.
And I mentioned a couple of things at the start during the introduction of this interview, such as filling up pools and watering one's garden. What are some of the other things, especially during these months, that really contribute towards this increased use of water in the city? And what is something that people can be keeping an eye on, for example? Like, we'll get onto a little bit more about if we could produce more water, whether that's the right thing, but at the moment, what's using it up and what can people do differently?
Yeah, so the difference between the two months in late spring, early summer is that a lot of people are watering their grass, a lot of people are filling up their pools, a lot of people are cleaning their cars, their driveways, the gardens. It's all the what we consider like exterior use. The interior use, the normal water, cleaning your clothes, that type of stuff, that's not what's really creating the issue. It's all the extra use that is predominantly done during those first 2 months of summer.
And we know this is drinking water, as you mentioned, potable, as in it's been treated and safe for us to consume through a glass, straight out of the tap to quench our thirst, for example. But we talk about a lot of this external use. Is it necessary for people to be using such potable water on external use? Is there alternatives we could be looking at? Does one need to fill up their swimming pool with drinking water?
No, there are definitely alternatives. I mean, one in terms of watering gardens and grass. There's rain barrels that could be used. There's in terms of filling pools, there's water that could be taken from other sources. There are commercial companies that do provide that service where you could purchase water, which is drawn either from the river or is drawn from a quarry or something like that. But the difference is that it's not treated water. So it's not essentially wasting treated water.
Yeah, so that could be a potential alternative for that. And again, you mentioned earlier about the amount of water we have to leave in reserve for the fire department in case there is an accident, a disaster, a fire-related incident that occurs in our region. Again, does the fire department need drinking water to be able to, once your house is doused in flames, I'm sure you don't need something that you could consume to put it out.
Yeah, well, so the challenge with that is that if we wanted to completely have raw water or water that wasn't treated for firefighting, we'd have to essentially mirror the system that we have in place. We'd have to double the infrastructure, which would be extremely costly, inefficient. And there aren't that many fires in a year. So when we think about it, there's water that's reserved, but what it means is it's not water that sits in the reservoirs permanently. It's water that is there. There's a level of water that's always maintained in the reservoirs. But as the reservoirs are filled up, that water is consumed, so it's not wasted. So so it's generally used, and it's.
And you mentioned about having sort of like a parallel network. What's the reason why these sort of like networks, one less treated, not ready for our taps? Why does it have to be on a whole different network?
It would be to avoid cross-contamination. We wouldn't be able to have raw water in contact with potable water.
Okay, grand. And then obviously the city is in the middle of a project at the moment with our neighbouring municipality of the nation to provide some fresh water, for drinking water for them as well, coming from this plant. So how much of effect would that have on the local drinking water system? I mean, if we're looking at 2-3 months of the year where residents locally are being charged because there's not enough, how can we be providing some to another municipality?
Yeah, well, so in terms of the project that we have with the nation, what's important to understand is that the consumption is very minimal. So we're talking about 350 cubic meters a day. So when you compare that to our average consumption, which is about 5,000 to 5,500, it's a really small percentage of that. But also our reservoirs store about 7,700, which I've mentioned. And so that means that there's already a lot of spare capacity in our reservoirs. So they would be taking from the spare capacity 350 cubic meters, which is not a significant amount.
Becomes inconsequential when we're
Becomes
talking
inconsequential,
about
exactly.
the figures we're talking about at the moment. Well, Julian, just to sort of like wrap up this conversation here, as we sort of like cast our minds forward, we mentioned about the city expanding and there's going to be an expansion of the network and how that sort of like balance of the system, it doesn't matter, there's no need to massively make it larger now. But what are the options for the city of Clarence-Rockland going forward then? What's the solution? Do we just accept that residents need to use less water there? Like, what is the solution going forward? What's the city's view on this?
Well, I think the city, or I think that there's definitely a lot that can be done in terms of preserving water. I mean, the city in the strategic plan has the environment as a pillar, and definitely there's a lot of policies or a lot of things that can be done to improve the water consumption or the amount of water that's consumed. When you think about it, like I've mentioned, it's an issue for 2 months out of the year. So I think that there's a lot that could be done to try and better manage water during those 2 months.
rather than trying to modify an entire system for those 2 months rather than the rest of the 10 months of the year.
Exactly.
All right, grand. Well, hopefully, Julian, that's cleared up a lot of things for a lot of people. I know that based on our conversations, I now understand the system a little bit better myself. And obviously, if anyone has any more questions about the system with the city and would like them to be answered, then feel free to get in touch with us. But for now, thank you very much for watching.